Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco-socialist program we ran on in 2020. And there's a lot of news from the last week I want to talk about, both in the Middle East and Ukraine. It was a pretty busy week. So, the thing that's got to be foremost on our mind is the continuing genocide in Gaza. The blockade of food and the bombing of civilians is abominable. It's war crimes, and we got to demand that it stop. And it was pretty obscene with Trump running around the Middle East this week, making deals with oil sheiks, none of whom had anything to say about the genocide in Gaza, at least publicly. This is about as morally degenerate as anything I've ever seen in international relations. And then behind the scenes stuff is happening. The U.S. was talking to Hamas and got the release of Eden Alexander, who's an American-Israeli soldier. But Steve Witkoff, the moron that Trump has doing all this international negotiation, he's a golf and real estate buddy of Trump's, as part of that deal, promised that the U.S. would stop Israel's rampage in Gaza in return for releasing Eden Alexander. And of course, that didn't happen, which, people around the world, diplomats, government leaders, see the hypocrisy there. And, trust in the U.S. word on anything is declining. So we have to keep raising this issue. And I think Congress should be the organizing target. We need to bring demands for an arms embargo of Israel to these mass demonstrations. The next big one looks like it's the June 14th Flag Day demonstrations that Indivisible is calling without, saying anything about Palestine. It's up to us to bring that to those events where they'll be well received. I mean, the majority of progressive-minded Americans think what Israel is doing is atrocious, and they have sympathy for the situation that the Palestinians in Gaza are in. We need to talk to our congressional delegations about the arms embargo. There's legislation coming up in the House. Sanders got the Senate to vote on it in March and only got 15 senators to vote for an arms embargo on offensive weapons to Israel. So that kind of tells us where we stand. Now, Pramila Jayapal and Rashida Tlaib have introduced legislation in the House for measures to block various categories of offensive weapons to Israel. And they will at some point here soon get a vote on them by proposing them as amendments to other bills. And we got to pay attention to this and talk to our particularly House representatives about that. What we really need to do, I think, at this point is get the House representatives on the record on arms to Israel so we can make it an issue in the midterms. And so that's about, I think, the best we can do with the House at this point, because we have such a long way to go to win them over to stopping the genocide. And there are not many people in Congress, in the House, talking about it. And the Democrats have still been tighter with Israel on this than the Republicans. Historically, it's been Republicans that have checked Israel on some of these things, going back to Eisenhower and Reagan and the elder Bush. And the Democrats have never done that. So that's part of the challenge we face. And, there's some strange happenings going on. I mean, Trump may be one of these Republicans that basically checks Israel. It seems even he, and he's been tweeting about this, is disgusted at the food blockade and the bombing of civilians in Gaza. And he also, or the administration had this ceasefire with the Houthis without Netanyahu being part of the deal. They're talking about an Iran deal, which Netanyahu doesn't want. So Netanyahu said this week that maybe Israel's going to have to, quote unquote, detox from its dependence on U.S. weapons supplies. Well, that's going to be hard for Israel. And I think all this shows is that nothing is permanent in politics. And we know that the outrage at Israel's genocide is growing across the American political spectrum, even on the Republican side, except for those evangelical, fundamentalists. So we need to keep pressing. And, what, gives me hope is I remember during the Vietnam War, how right across the political spectrum, there was popular support for the war until there wasn't. In '68, after the Tet Offensive, there was like a massive switch in public opinion. Suddenly, it's like maybe in the back of their minds, people were having their doubts. And then the Tet Offensive and, Walter Cronkite famously saying it doesn't look like the U.S. can win this war, public opinion changed. And it became less and less tenable for U.S. imperialism over the next few years to fight the war. The soldiers stopped fighting. That was a big part of it. And the U.S. was eventually forced to withdraw. So that all I'm saying is it may look hopeless right now, but there is some, cracks appearing, given what the negotiations Trump has done over Netanyahu's head. And, we just need to keep pushing. And my experience in social movements is you think you're beating your head against a brick wall, and suddenly you break through, and then everybody comes with you, even people that were never there. But once they're there with you, they say, yeah, we were always supporting you. We're always with you. So the genocide in Gaza, we got to keep pushing that issue forward. And then there was a lot of news on Ukraine this week. Let me, before I get into that, say that Vladislav Starodubtsev, who we had on this podcast earlier this year, has enlisted in the armed forces of Ukraine and is getting ready to fight. And we also have had Taras Bilis. We've put an interview with him I did in Kyiv. He's an active duty soldier, a socialist activist. And I don't know if I mentioned this on the podcast. He got wounded. He's in a drone reconnaissance unit, and he was out fixing an antenna or something, and a shell exploded nearby. He's got shrapnel in his legs. Apparently, he's going to fully recover, and that's good. But that's just to say that those of us doing Ukraine solidarity work with, leftists and Greens in Ukraine, I mean, this is getting personal because people we know are at risk, and their families have had casualties. It's real. So last week, a week ago, last weekend, the European leaders of the Coalition of the Willing, that would be the UK, France, Germany, and Poland, met with Zelensky in Kyiv and said, if there's not a 30-day ceasefire, unconditional ceasefire that Russia agrees to by Monday, they were going to impose really punitive sanctions. And actually, Trump's been calling for the ceasefire for a couple of months. And Zelensky's agreed, but not Putin. And at the end of their meeting, they got on the phone, and there's a picture of them sitting around a coffee table with the phone on, loudspeaker, pleading with Trump to join them. That's pathetic to me. I mean, they are begging this guy that's, shown so much, he's put all the pressure on Ukraine, not Russia. And they've got to realize, and maybe their game is, let's just keep Trump, on our side long enough to get the arms already in the pipeline to Ukraine, and then, we're going to have to do it ourselves in Europe. But to me, that was just a pathetic, picture. They need to be stronger with Trump, in my opinion. But this apparently spooked Putin because Sunday night, I think it was, maybe it was Saturday night or Sunday morning, Monday morning, Putin had a 1 a.m. news conference, and he called for direct negotiations in Istanbul, Turkey, between Russia and Ukraine. And he thought, he was putting the ball back in Zelensky's court, and Zelensky called his bluff. He said, okay, I'll be in Istanbul waiting for Putin. And unfortunately, the European leaders, that kind of scuttled the sanctions. And they said, we'll wait to see what happens on Thursday. They still haven't implemented them. And Trump undermined the ceasefire he'd been calling for by saying, once Putin said we're going to have negotiations in Istanbul, that Zelensky should go. And Trump even hinted he might go if Putin went. But Putin, of course, didn't go. He kind of kept, quiet for a couple of days, and then at the last minute named a delegation. of basically low-level second stringers, the same people they sent to the previous negotiations in Istanbul in March and April 2022, who have no authority to make any decisions on behalf of Russia in the negotiations. So it wasn't serious. And, Putin's been saying, and this has been repeated by his echo chamber here, Medea Benjamin and Nicholas Davis of Code Pink and the various pro-Putin, podcasts, that both sides initialed an agreement in early April 2022 to end the war. And that's not true. We now have very good documentation because the documents have been released in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal have posted that. Let's put a couple of these articles from Foreign Affairs in the chat where Samuel Charap and Sergei Radchenko go over it. And let's also put, I haven't got to that yet. I will in a moment. Oh yeah, the sanctions bill for the House on arms to Israel. Let's put the link in there to the House bill so people can be familiar with that so they can talk to the representatives. And then these two articles from Charap and Radchenko. And, you go through the details and Ukraine never agreed to them because Ukraine's bottom line, and it's clear from these documents, is they wanted security guarantees. Same thing they want now. And if it wasn't going to be NATO, it was going to be something else. And what the people like Putin and Medea Benjamin and the rest of them say is that Boris Johnson went to Kyiv on April 9th, 2022 and told Zelensky not to sign. And Johnson didn't say that. There's one article from an anonymous source that you could kind of read into it, but a couple of lefties in Ukraine actually interviewed that journalist, and he said that's not what Johnson said. What Johnson said was, we won't give you security guarantees. In other words, the equivalent of NATO. In other words, if there's a peace agreement, the West won't back it up by military intervention if Russia violates it, which is what Article 5 of NATO would require them to do. Johnson said, but we'll send you arms so you can fight the Russian invasion on your own. And so that's how it ended. And, I've written this up and I don't have the citations with me, but before Johnson was in Ukraine, Lavrov said the deal was not done and Ukraine wasn't given enough. And then a couple of days after Johnson was there, Putin said, we're not going to have a peace deal. We're going to fight. So to say that Johnson spoiled it and Zelensky did what Johnson said is just not true. But that's a narrative that's out there on a lot of the peace and progressive social media. So, look at what the Charap and Radchenko articles say. They have really, laid it out. One was last year and one was just recently, May 8th, where they kind of recapitulated. It's in more detail in the first article. So Zelensky was in Turkey. They sent, the Ukrainians sent a high-level delegation. Umarov, the defense minister, who's a Muslim Crimean Tatar, and Zelensky's chief of staff and some high military officials, they were there ready to, deal if the Russians were. The Russians weren't. And the meeting only lasted less than 2 hours. The Russians demanded that the Turks who were hosting the meeting leave the room and then started, making these demands on the Ukrainians. They were saying, give us the rest of these oblasts we've claimed to have annexed, although our military doesn't occupy all of them. In other words, they want Ukraine to leave their people to the Russians in large areas of oblasts that are still controlled by Ukraine. Oblasts are like states are in the United States. And, the Russian demands were the same. What they call demilitarization. In other words, and this was in the April 2022 agreements, that very strict restrictions on the size of the Ukrainian military and their neutrality, no alliances with other countries to help them defend themselves. Denazification, which means a new regime change. And, they've been calling for new elections in Ukraine. Trump has too. If they get a ceasefire, they might push that demand. And because of the way Trump and Vance treated Zelensky in the Oval Office at the end of February, Zelensky's poll numbers have soared in Ukraine because the people saw him standing up to bullies and they said, well, we're going to back this guy. So if the elections are held anytime soon, Zelensky will probably be reelected. So it's kind of a loser for the Russians, and if that's what they want. And then the Russians threatened, the Ukrainians. They said, well, if you don't agree to give up 4 oblasts now, we're going to come back next time with 2 more oblasts, probably Sumy and Kharkiv, that we're going to, take. And, Ukrainians basically said, we're not buying any of this. We're not surrendering to your demands. And, they're ready to talk some of the terms of that April 22 agreement where, the Ukrainians said, we'll leave the part of the Donbass that then Russia controlled in Crimea to diplomatic discussions, not military conflict, to see where they end up. And they were willing to be neutral, in other words, not be in NATO, but they weren't willing to do that at the cost of demilitarization, which would leave them vulnerable to further Russian invasion. So coming out of this meeting, Trump said, well, of course, Putin didn't go because I wasn't going. And Trump basically put himself at the center of everything, again, saying, this isn't going to be solved until I talk to Putin directly. And lo and behold, Trump tweeted this morning that he's talking to Putin at 10 a.m. Monday morning. So, the ball is back in Trump's court. Is he going to support Ukraine and Russia? The whole history of Trump is supporting Russia. He's put all the pressure on Ukraine, none on Russia. But there's a chance, like, I was talking about in the Middle East, that Trump may surprise us. If Putin makes him look bad, he could flip and support sanctions. And the American public, most Democratic members of the House and Senate, and a sizable portion of the Republicans in Congress, even though they haven't been that public, support Ukraine. And Congress could force Trump's hand on this if they really want to. I think that's where the leverage is. There's a sanctions bill called, and we got that bill, we can put in the chat, the Sanctioning of Russia Act of 2025. It's got 73 Senate sponsors. It's veto proof if the Senate is serious. The corresponding bill in the House only has about 25 or 30 co-sponsors. And, you have to ask yourself, where's the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, the Squad? I don't see any of them as co-sponsors of the House version. So that's something we should talk to those members of Congress about. I think, the other thing in the background is this minerals deal, which Zelensky signed. I think the Rada, the parliament in Ukraine, is still debating. And it's clear that, Trump wants a piece of Ukraine, like Putin does. They want to carve it up between them. That's what the mineral deals is about. It's a neo-colonial grab for Ukraine's resources at a time when it's vulnerable, under attack by Russia. There is no proposal aside from this to give arms to Ukraine coming from Trump or any sizable movement within Congress. There is the question of whether the U.S. will even sell arms to Ukraine. Now, at this point, the U.S. Is allowing 2 Patriot air defense systems, which intercept incoming ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, in particular from Russia to Ukraine, and they're coming from Israel and Germany. That requires U.S. permission. So apparently, the Trump administration has given that permission. And it's significant that Israel, this is the first time they've done anything for Ukraine. They have remained neutral. Netanyahu and Putin have a special relationship. I've written about that. So this is a change. Now, the minerals deal, instead of the U.S. Giving arms and economic aid to Ukraine like it did under Biden, they're going to basically require Ukraine to buy this stuff. and that's supposed to be financed by this minerals deal, which is questionable because it'll take years for it to generate money, because it really requires, a peace settlement so that the mining can begin. And it's also more about oil and gas than minerals. I've talked about that and pointed to this article by Anastasia, I forget her last name. It was in Rolling Stone. And she lays that out. Now, the Ukrainian left is opposed to this minerals deal. We'll put a link from Vitaly Dudin, who was another guy that I don't know if we put him on the podcast. I put him in my Dispatches from Europe and New Green Horizons, an interview with him. He's a Ukrainian labor lawyer, socialist. And so he lays out the left's case in Ukraine for not accepting this minerals deal. The Ukrainian Green Party, mostly in Ukrainian, they're not as good as Sotsialny Ruch, the socialist group, in getting their stuff into English. The Ukrainian climate campaigner, Svetlana Romanko, who we've had on the podcast, also oppose a minerals deal as just neo-colonial exploitation. And for the Greens and Svetlana, it's a climate bomb, because the minerals are most interested in the oil and gas. And there's a lot of gas that can be fracked on land and in the Black Sea and the Azov Sea that is in Ukrainian territory. And then the other side of the deal is letting Chevron and Exxon and Halliburton and everybody back into the Russian oil and gas business. And like I said, that's a climate bomb. We should be leaving that stuff in the ground and going to renewables. So there's a lot going on. I think, just to sum up where I think our leverage is we got to be talking to our congressional delegations about the sanctioning Russia bill, as well as the bills now in the House to stop offensive arms sales to Israel. So I think that's a summary of what happened this week, my sense of what happened, and where I think we can make a difference. And we got to bring it out in these demonstrations too. A good slogan is, from Ukraine to Palestine, occupation is a crime. You can put that on your banner. And before we go to your questions and comments, I just want to note a victory this week. Ranked choice voting was adopted by the Boston City Council. And this was initiated by a grassroots movement. They did a home rule petition to force the council to address it. The council voted for it Thursday. I wish I could say the Greens in Boston or Massachusetts had a big role in this. They didn't, according to from what I've been able to see, but it's something that Greens should be doing right across the country. And we're facing a strong Republican effort to make ranked choice voting illegal in about half the states that the Republicans control. They're just saying you can't do it anywhere. States like Florida, there's cities that have voted to do it, but the Republicans in Florida got a state law saying you can't do it. And so we got to fight that. But I think the thing about the ranked choice victory in Boston is that it shows we can make changes at the grassroots level, despite all the craziness coming from the Trump administration. And we got to do it there to build the foundations for challenging power at the higher levels. And, I've talked about that. I think we should be electing thousands to local office in Trump time and use that as a launching pad for state legislature and the House of Representatives. And we get a Green caucus in the House, and we will have leverage on national policy, and we'll be part of the debate. And getting in the debate is half the problem. So let's keep pushing at the local level and build from there. So let's see what you guys have to say, what your questions are. Email, thoughts on the Comey 8647 tweet. I knew that would come up. I think, Trump and his minions, have an easy way to get headlines and paint themselves as victims. I think Comey's probably, he wasn't seriously calling for Trump's assassination. I think he says he'd like to see Trump removed. So would a lot of us, but I think it's probably going to be much ado about nothing. I think the FBI will look at it and say, we got more serious things to deal with. At least that's what I hope they do. But we'll see how it plays out. Joanna Munley, your thoughts on the mass protests around the U.S. Also, do you think our judicial and legislative branches will save us from the Trump regime? Well, to the first question, I think we need to be involved in them. I hear Greens with kind of a green chauvinism saying, it's Democratic leadership and this is sheepdogging people into the Democratic Party. Most of the people coming to these demonstrations are not part of organizations. They don't have fixed, political strategies. They're mad at Trump. They're worried about everything from their schools to Social Security to immigrants in their community. There are so many issues they're worried about. And this is a good place for us to talk to people. And the demonstrations are unlike, it used to be, where you'd have coalitions of organizations, real organizations, come together and plan out mass protests against wars or against the intermediate range missiles in Europe, the Euro missiles crisis in the 80s, things like that. Now we just have organizations like Indivisible or Answer on the campus left. They just call demonstrations without any previous discussion or participation of grassroots people. And we got a political culture now where we are atomized and individualized. So we're all watching TV and looking at our phone screens in our own silos, getting centralized messaging, and then showing up at mobilizations. We jump up and down with signs for an hour or two and then go home. We're not meeting with each other at the grassroots. There's a political vacuum, not just of progressive, independent political action, but of just places where people can get together face to face and think and talk things through. And that's a vacuum the Greens should fill. That's my reaction to that. The Greens should be in this and should be using participation in them to organize their local parties. Come with slogans, come with your literature, talk to people, recruit a few people, get them involved, and keep build organization, because the rest of the people coming to these things are not really in organizations. They are hearing about it by email or text message. And, they may be on the Indivisible list or a group that's supporting the Indivisible initiative. But, they're not involved in formulating the actions and, what will happen. So I think it's a great opportunity for us. So I think, these protests will continue. People are mad as hell at Trump for, innumerable reasons. And we should be there, not saying, well, it was the Democratic group Indivisible or whoever, or the unions on May Day, and they didn't really do that much, who initiated this. Well, fine, but they gathered a lot of people, and then, we can be there and talk and persuade those people, or just build relationships, on the basis of which we can have political discussions going forward. So do our judicial and legislative branches will save us from the Trump regime? I think they're going to put speed bumps on it. It's, I think, an open question is whether they can stop the worst authoritarian moves by Trump. And, is he going to declare martial law and just try to bypass all that? How much gut does particularly the progressive Democrats, but the corporate Democrats as well, have in their legislatures at both the state and federal level? Not seeing a lot of that now. The judges are doing better, I think, at, telling the Trump administration, what the law is, although he's winning some victories in court too. So I don't think they'll save us on their own. We really got to have a mass movement, and we really need an independent left that's organized and serious about power, not just performative politics where we, show our signs and then go home and hope we got covered on TV. That's not serious politics. We got to be talking about electing thousands to local office in the coming period, and on that basis, then the state legislatures and the House of Representatives. I think that's the strategy for the Greens and the independent left writ large. And we need to organize, not just mobilize. I think that's got to be our watchword. So that's what's going to save us in the end, because we can't count on the Democrats or on Democratic and Republican appointed judges. They're going to, I think, accommodate Trump more than resist him. So like I said, they may put some speed bumps in the way, but by themselves, they will not stop this authoritarian move to the right. That's the movement we've got to build that's going to do that. Vicki Corden, your thoughts on June 14, Trump's parade and the counter protests? Well, yeah, Trump wants to do like Putin did a couple of weeks ago. And I know the military is not happy about it, but they're not resisting it. They did a little bit when Trump wanted to do a parade in his first term. In the counter protests, I know that Indivisible already called for demonstrations, as I understand it, decentralized like they've been doing on June 14th, which is Flag Day. I don't know if they're targeting Trump's parade, and that may be another group that I don't know. I would be surprised if there weren't some groups trying to counter the parade itself. And I think that's fine. Displays of militarism are not solving any problems. And we really need to, from the left, be saying the emphasis in international policy should be promoting human rights, international law, and democracy. And military has very limited and last resort uses. And instead of this militarism, which is getting everybody chanting USA, USA, and sending our troops off to fight in mostly stupid wars. So that's my thoughts about that. It's the militarism culture that Trump is promoting that concerns me as much as anything. And it's not just Trump in this parade. I mean, it's the flyovers at football games and, the ROTC on the campuses and, the advertising on TV about, the opportunities in the armed forces. It's pervasive and it's not questioned. And we need to question it and promote an alternative approach to foreign policy. So June 14th is part of that, but it's got to be an ongoing campaign. Vicki Corden, I think everyone disagrees with this fascist regime needs to be together. It does not matter party affiliation at this point, Republican, Democratic, Greens, non-affiliated, etc. Yeah, I think on the streets for sure. We need to be together. We need to be better organized with more focused demands. I mean, I'm thinking of Indivisible because they played a major role in this. They have like 20 different demands. There's no strategy of promoting a particular demand or two or three, given what's going on in Congress and with the Trump administration. So you're putting pressure on that issue. It's more an amorphous, anti-Trump focus. So, but we should be on the streets with that. I know there's, as I mentioned, some Greens that are, staying away because it would somehow make them less pure in their political independence. But you can bring your political independence into these demonstrations. And yeah, we need a united front against the fascists. And when it comes to electoral politics, that's where the Greens have a unique position among most of the groups involved in this protest. And that is, we're saying we can't rely on the Democrats to fight fascism. We got a better program for fighting fascism, which is a pro-worker, progressive, populist economic program, a progressive social policy program on issues of racism and LGBTQ rights and women's rights. And those are majority positions that we can build, I believe, a majority party around. At least at the beginning, we can have there's a huge political vacuum there. And that's the one we should be filling. So we can agree to, protest Trump. We don't have to agree on the electoral strategy. In fact, we can go into those movements and say, look, we need to try a different approach, because otherwise the Democrats just take us for granted because they know we're not going to vote for the Republicans. And that just takes away our leverage. So I think we bring our independent politics into this united front against Trump. Chris Blankenhorn, video games are another area where the military inserts itself in culturally. Shooter games are very popular, and the military spends about 5% of their marketing budget in the esports arena and advises a lot of these huge blockbuster game series. Yes, I'm not a gamer myself. I have to confess, I don't think I've ever played a computer game. I just got too many things to do. But I know we had a gamer from Lviv, Ukraine on, and he had a name for himself. He's a type of person that they call gamers. And we do broadcast this on Twitch. So, I know that, particularly you, Chris, are aware of this. And, not playing any games, but just watching occasionally the advertising on TV about them. Yeah, the militarism is pretty repellent. And, maybe that's the place for gamers to, develop a clever game, of how to do diplomacy to reduce conflicts. I have no idea about gaming, but, there's a challenge for any of you gamers out there. That would be interesting. And then you got the problem of marketing it and all that. But just to have the game out there would be, shoot, I might even play it. My first computer game. Todich Lilny. I hope I pronounced that right, if it's a real name, which I don't know what language that would be, but anyway. Have you seen statements made by GPACs that repeat Russian talking points about Ukraine? How can we stop them? Yeah, I have. I mean, they've been doing that since the beginning of this war. And for a group that advocates peace to be so supportive of Russian aggression it's hypocritical and counterproductive for green politics. And it's out of line with green politics all over the world except here. How can we stop them? I think we need to speak out. I actually spent the whole week updating a resources list we have on the Ukraine Solidarity Network website of articles and videos, podcasts, as well as solidarity organizations and news sources that people can use to educate themselves and stay up on these events. And the thing that struck me was, I had kind of felt like between, GPACs and the Green Party, but especially, Medea Benjamin and Cole Pink and, the tanky podcasters like Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal and Glenn Greenwald and Jimmy Dore, we were getting swamped. And I looked at all the material that our Ukraine Solidarity Network people have generated, the Ukrainians have generated, the anti-war Russians have generated. This is all online. There are great, webinars and panels and hundreds of articles. And I thought, well, maybe that explains why the vast majority of progressive and peace-minded Americans are with Ukraine. That's clear from the polling. The people that support Putin are the MAGA Republicans and these marginal parts of the peace and, pacifist and ideological left, which is basically kind of a neo-Stalinist left. And they have not won over the progressive and peace-minded majority. They're kind of loud in the margins of the left, but I don't think they've had popular appeal. So that's to say, how can we stop them? We need to keep doing what we're doing. Educate, speak up, And then within the Green Party, I have to say this, that I actually saw the Greens were kind of divided on the question of arms to Ukraine, but most seem to oppose Russia's invasion. So I proposed to the New York Green Party leadership that we propose a resolution to the National Committee that we say we condemn the Russian invasion, we support the sanctions against Russia, we support humanitarian aid to the Ukrainians, and we support negotiations. And we leave the question of arms aside. That's what groups like Peace Action did, which is the biggest peace group in the country, and they've been supportive of Ukraine without taking a position on the arms question. And I thought the Greens, overwhelming majority would consent to that. Although some of the leadership in the New York Green Party said, no, we got to say we're against arms to Ukraine. And I said, that's going to be divisive, and this will not divide us. It will not give guidance to the party. It will basically create a winner-take-all, zero-sum situation, which is not what leaders in the Green Party should do. They should be building unity around what we can agree on while we may debate issues without taking a position on issues we have disagreements on. And I dropped that because of the objections, because we were about to go into a petitioning campaign to try to get on the ballot for governor. And then GPACs came up with their proposal. And I have to say, they did invite me to one of their meetings, and we had a debate online with each other. And at the end of that, they said, well, would you like to see the resolution we're proposing before it's submitted? I said, sure, for comment. And they never sent it to me. They put it into the National Committee, and it split the National Committee right down the middle. The final vote was 48 to 44, 8 abstentions and 70 people not voting at all. And it was very bitter. And the people promoting it were attacking people like me who wanted to support Ukraine, including arms, as being CIA, State Department socialists, blah, blah, blah. Some of them called for my expulsion from the Green Party. It was divisive. It's not how leadership should be done in the Green Party. We're going to have disagreements, so we debate them, and we should agree on and work on the things we agree on. So going back to the Ukraine question, at some point, it would be good if Greens who support Ukraine try to, get a up-to-date position that builds around the things we do agree on, and overcomes this division we've had within the Green Party. I don't know if now is a propitious time to do that. I'm really interested to see what comes out of the Trump, Putin, and then he's going to call Zelensky, and then he's going to call the NATO leaders on Monday. What comes out of that? It may be, it's pretty clear Trump's been aligned with Putin, but Putin seems to be wearing on Trump's patience, because it's clear Putin wants Ukraine, not peace. And that's dawning through, the orange man's little brain. And he may just get fed up and say, okay, let's do the sanctions that the 73 senators want to do. And that sanctions bill, I forgot to mention this. The kicker in there is 500% secondary sanctions or tariffs on goods from any country that buys Russian oil and gas. China, India, they'd have to decide between buying oil and gas from Russia or doing business with the United States. And Trump likes tariffs, so who knows? So I'm kind of waiting for that to settle out. And how do we stop them? I think we definitely need to speak up and keep that debate going. And whether, we should take it to the National Committee and try to get a change of policy. I just don't have, my gut tells me now's not the time. We aren't organized enough. But let's think about when that time might be. Andrew Hager, have you seen RFK Jr.'s court case where he admitted no one should take his words seriously? Well, that sounds like him. He's not consistent. And he's also an opportunist, going from being a relatively liberal Democrat to a Trumpy because he saw a way to get in higher in the power structure. So, no one should take his words seriously. I think that's one time he was right about himself. Via email, thoughts on SCOTUS rejecting Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act. Um, I'm not clear where that stands. I know they've uh, pushed back on some of the things the administration is doing, but there are other, I guess it's at the circuit level, there's 3 decisions against using the Alien Enemies Act, but another one that says it's okay within parameters. So I think it's coming back to the Supreme Court. That's my understanding of where we're at. If I'm behind on the news, please let us know in the chat. Vicky Corden, your thoughts about Hassan Piker was detained by Custom and Border Patrol for 2 hours at the Chicago airport. He was questioned about his political leanings. I wonder what's next for the rest of us. Yeah, I think that's terrible. That your right to come back in the United States as a citizen is not dependent on your political views, at least according to our Constitution. And I was worried about coming back in after being in Papua New Guinea, Australia. And it turns out the day I landed in Dallas, and there was a big backup in processing people through. And the guy, when I got there, he looked at me. He didn't even look at my passport. He just waved me through. He must have thought this guy can't be an illegal alien. He's an old white guy, and he just to diminish the line, he waved me through. So it's kind of random. But my thoughts is it should very much concern us, and we should protest. The conditioning our rights on our politics, which the Trump administration is doing. That is what authoritarian regimes do, not democratic regimes. Via email, comments on Moody's revoking the U.S. top credit rating due to debt and the regular debt ceiling politicization. Well, this is the 3rd time they've done it. They did it, I think, late Bush administration and or maybe early Obama administration when we were going through the 2008 financial crisis. They did it again during the COVID lockdown. So I wouldn't read too much into it, but Moody's has its criteria, and our debt is rising, and the debt ceiling fights are always ridiculous. No other country has, I guess one other country, it's like Finland or Denmark, but it's never politicized there. They just raise the debt ceiling when it's needed. And here, the Republicans in particular have made it an issue, and the far-right Republicans. It's interesting that they voted with the Democrats against the big, beautiful bill for this reactionary budget that Trump and Johnson tried to get passed in the House. So, I guess maybe Moody's was reacting to that because they see, the debt and the budget are going to be politicized again by the far right in Congress. And that's not good for fiscal management and just delivering the services government is supposed to deliver. So, and that can then affect the economy and, make the debt problem even worse. It's Denmark where they have a debt ceiling, but they raise it years before it becomes an issue. Yeah. Andrew Hager. Howie, what are your thoughts on the USA currently on the list of most dangerous countries to visit? Whose list is that? I've heard something about that. But you can see why, with the immigration authorities, targeting people that look like they might be have foreign country origins, even if they're here just on a visa to visit. Um, yeah, it would be. I would give that advice to people if I was in another country, um, and it's probably smart advice given what the Trump administration is doing and this draconian attack on immigrants. Um, and this used to be a place that people sought for asylum. Now, just thinking about Ukraine, the Ukrainians are 240,000 here who are worried that they're going to be under the sights of immigration authorities for deportation. There are Russian anti-war activists. There's a researcher at Harvard who was detained because she brought frog embryos for the research in her suitcase, and they caught her when she came in to the airport, and now she's sitting in one of these immigration detention centers, about to be returned to Russia, where she fled because she engaged in anti-war activities. So she could end up, deported here, being a important researcher in her field at Harvard, to a, Siberian prison in Russia. And, there's no reason for that, certainly if you uphold democratic rights. So, yeah, this is not a safe country for political asylum now. And you're aware of the three prestigious professors, Jason Stanley, an authority on fascism, Timothy Snyder and his wife Marcy Shore, who are experts in Eastern European politics and the rise of authoritarianism, written books on the rise of fascism. They had a sort of a interactive video in the New York Times as an op-ed this week on why they went to Canada. And Marcy Shore said, she knows from history that if you didn't get out of Germany by 1933, you were in trouble. And she's worried we're at 1933 here in the American move to the right. And one of them said that, and maybe it was Timothy Snyder, that, it's important that there be centers of democratic resistance outside the reach of Trump, which for them would be, they're in Toronto, Canada now, which is just across the lake from where I'm at. And they'll be like Radio Free America broadcasting back into the country and on various platforms, as long as they're open. So yeah, this is becoming a dangerous country, not just for people visiting here, but for us who live here. And we should not be silenced or intimidated. That's just what the authoritarians want, and then they can get their way. Also, the Afghan asylees who have had their status revoked. Yeah, it's terrible what the administration is doing. It's exact opposite of the Statue of Liberty and the message on that statute about give us you're tired and hungry, yearning to be free. It's against the best traditions of America. Anything to say on the upcoming 100th birthday on Malcolm X on Monday? Well, I think, if you haven't read the autobiography of Malcolm X, even though it, the author Alex Haley took some liberties, it's still a very inspiring story. It's basically correct. And, he overcame difficult circumstances to become a leader for Black freedom and evolve within that movement from, the Nation of Islam to a more internationalist and socialist position in his last year after visiting the Middle East and Africa. And I think there's a lot to learn from that. And I think, people should read his essays. And I've talked to people who heard him speak, like Murray Bookchin said, he told me once he'd gone up to the Audubon Ballroom that's where Malcolm was assassinated, but he gave speeches there frequently. And Murray went up there to listen, and he said this guy was one of the most effective speakers. He could read a room. He knew who to say to all kinds of audiences. He was just a very effective communicator. So I think his speeches, you can get them on they're online. They're on tapes and whatever we're using now to plug into your car. I still got a disc of his speeches I occasionally listen to, just give me some inspiration. So I say, read the autobiography, read his essays, and listen to him speak. I mean, they're just, it's a demonstration of how to be an effective speaker. To move your audience in both emotionally and intellectually. He was incredible in that regard, and so that's what I would say about his 100th birthday. Let's remember and learn from his life, which ended at age 39, I believe. It's you wonder what would have happened if he'd lived on through the rest of the 60s and into the 70s. Vicky Corden, I'm concerned that we could lose access to information and news from overseas under this regime. Access to information is part of free speech. I think you're right to be concerned. We see how countries like Russia and China are very effective at making it difficult for the average person to get access to other sources that are on the internet. If you know how to use a VPN and things like that, there are ways around it, but you have to be more sophisticated than most people are. And, I can see, Trump, like he'll be in these news conferences and some British guy will ask him a question and say, who are you from? And they say BBC, and he'll say something like, oh, no wonder you ask such stupid questions. That's Trump. And you can see the next step being denying them the ability to broadcast in our country. And that's a problem. So, yeah, access to information. The Europeans have the best regulations in the EU on, access, keeping your online information private, but also getting access to information that's there. And we need legislation like that here. We're not going to get it from Trump. I'm sure there's some people in Congress that have done some work on it, but I'm just not familiar with, what might be in the hopper, but it's something we definitely need to pay attention to. Andrew Hager, can you guys think of any countries where we can be safe until the entire Trump administration is booted out and our country is finally safe again? Well, I think Canada, that's where these professors went, and they seem to have elected an anti-Trump candidate against a conservative who was kind of pro-Trump, which killed him in the elections. I mean, the Liberal Party, which won, was toast. I mean, they were way down in the polls until the conservative guys started touting Trump. Same thing happened in Australia, which I think is relatively safe. New Zealand, England, I think most of the Western European countries, we can be safe there politically as well as physically in those countries for sure. And then, if you have, connections and the resources to do it, there are countries in the global South that are, safe. So I think there are plenty of options still. But I think most of us need to stay here and fight for our freedom in this country. If you get in a bind because Trump goes after you, okay, that's one thing. But, if you're not a target, be part of that solution. Don't run from it. Okay, another hour. Um, and I've got some people in mind for as guests in future podcasts. I just haven't, I spent this week doing that resource list. I thought it would take a day. It took me 5 days. So that kind of took most of my free time. But I'll get some, letters out to people. I was thinking Nadal Batari might be good to bring back on. The situation in Syria, he was very optimistic right after Assad fell. I'm curious as to what he thinks about that. He's a Palestinian, so I'm sure he's got things to say about what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank. So I think I can get him on pretty short notice. So I expect to have him soon. I expect to have David Shoebridge, the Australian Green senator who's fighting AUKUS, this nuclear submarine scheme between the U.S., the U.K., and Australia, to campaign against that. There are a lot of ideas. So stay tuned. I just can't announce any right now. But, let's keep talking about what's going on, what we can do, and we'll be here next Saturday live at 3 o'clock Eastern time. And if you can't make that, we're on most major podcast platforms. So, we'll see you next week. And in the meantime, have a good week. Stay active, stay hopeful, know that things can and will change, and you can make a difference.